My name is Lucinda Brennan, 25 years old. My parents said it so often it calcified into family scripture. Your brother is the smart one. You're just the pretty one. It started when I was 7 and learned how to keep my face pleasant while something inside me quietly wrote everything down. Report cards came back with straight A's. Dad nodded without looking up from Ethan's science fair schematics. Mom signed me up for posture classes and pageants, taught me to smile with my eyes, to answer softly, to take up less space at the dinner table while Ethan explained quantum tunneling to a room full of adults who adored the sound of his voice. I learned there are two kinds of invisibility, being unseen and being seen for the wrong thing. I was both. The first time I beat Ethan at something measurable, it didn't count. He placed 5th at the state math competition. I placed 3rd. We rode home in silence until Dad said the judges were probably trying to encourage girls. Mom squeezed my knee and said, "See? You don't need to be book smart when you're pretty." I pressed my tongue to the roof of my mouth and watched the highway lights turn the windshield into a stuttering metronome. Hold your breath, hold your tongue, hold your place. By high school, the roles had hardened. Ethan was MIT bound in everyone's imagination, and my best outcome, according to Mom, was marry well and be adored. I carried a 4.0 like a secret under my coat. I answered questions in class, and then pretended I hadn't said anything when the boys repeated my answers louder. A guidance counselor asked if I'd considered communications because I had presence. I said yes, and added the comment to my ledger of small insults. I smiled in photographs, learned angles, practiced making people underestimate me. Being dismissed is painful. Being underestimated is useful. The college letters arrived like a dare. Harvard, Yale, Princeton, full rides to all 3. I lined them up on the kitchen counter while Mom arranged peonies and Dad stirred his drink. He patted my head and said something about diversity optics, about how admissions offices loved a girl who photographed well. The way the word photograph left his mouth told me everything he believed about my face and nothing about my mind. I refolded the letters carefully and decided to stop asking to be seen. Recognition is a transaction. Power is a plan. I chose Princeton less for the crest than for the man whose program lived there, Professor Grayson, curator of the most coveted economics internship in the country, the one Dad still, after 3 drinks, called the old wound. 30 years ago, he'd been rejected. 30 years later, he still believed the door should have opened for him and would open for his son. I applied quietly, wore pastel on visiting day, laughed at the right times, and double majored in economics and computer science without mentioning either at home. I posted sorority photos because camouflage is a science. I learned to code until the sun folded itself behind the library and the janitors forgot I existed. I built models that scavenged information from places men in good suits never look. I named the folder Athena Alpha and liked the joke too much to change it. Sophomore spring, I landed Grayson's internship. I told my parents over Sunday dinner. Dad lifted his glass and said they probably needed a pretty face for the brochure. Mom told me not to embarrass myself. I smiled and passed the salad, feeling something forged and quiet settle into place. The internship fed me everything I needed to build what came next: the rhythms of markets, the fragility of reputations, the real power of clean data and colder nerve. The algorithms I wrote started as a curiosity, then began outperforming entire funds by margins that made seasoned traders clear their throats and change the subject. A managing director at Stratton Capital, Roland Vance, Dad's college roommate turned measuring stick, sent an email full of charm and implied ownership. I thanked him, declined the job, and incorporated my own fund with $50,000 I'd earned, licensing a sliver of my code. I named it Athena Investments because wisdom and warfare can share a face if you teach them how. For 6 months, I operated like a ghost. Shell companies, blind trusts, legal opacity so crisp you could cut yourself on it. My system hunted mispricings with a predator's patience, then struck while everyone else refreshed their dashboards. I didn't chase. I waited. It turns out that when you stop needing to be applauded, you can hear the market breathe. Returns compounded into a number I kept writing down and still didn't quite believe. Bloomberg started whispering about a mysterious new player. I let them speculate. I had better things to do than correct men who were certain they were right. At home, the performance continued. I told Mom I worked in marketing for a small tech company. She praised my Instagram cohesion. Dad asked about Ethan's fellowship applications while I filled water glasses and considered covariance matrices. On the rare nights I slept there, I lay awake in my childhood room and listened to the house rehearse the old story, the smart one, the pretty one, and I wrote a new ending in my head, line by line, like code. Near the end of my junior year, I refreshed a watch list and felt the floor tilt. Brennan Industries, the family monument, Dad's living cathedral, had hemorrhaged a quarter of its value in 5 trading days. A bad acquisition had metastasized. A worse balance sheet had finally told the truth. I watched the ticker stumble at open and thought, not joy exactly, more like inevitability. Empires fall for the same reason promises do. The math stops working. I didn't move fast, I moved correctly. I built the structure first. LLCs nested inside LLCs like lacquered dolls, quiet custody agreements, dark pool routes nobody at the country club would notice. I mapped the board, charted their pension liabilities, charted their willingness to sleep through risk if the dividends still arrived. I began to buy in little breaths, shares slipping into my hands at prices that looked like clearance stickers to anyone who thought brand names never go on sale. No bravado, no noise, just quiet accumulation. Somewhere in there, I realized I wasn't chasing validation anymore. I was building the lever I'd always needed and had been told I didn't deserve. On a Sunday afternoon, Dad called to say a vulture fund was circling his legacy. His voice had the strain of a man who still believed the world owed him gratitude. 20 years, he said, and some anonymous parasite thinks it can take what I built. I looked at my manicure and told him maybe Ethan could help. He hung up angry and uncertain. I hung up and moved another 0.5% across the board. By the time summer ripened into a mean August, I controlled more than anyone understood and far less than I intended. Athena's year 1 returns translated into a war chest. I slept less, smiled more convincingly, and rehearsed for the only room that still mattered to me, the family dining room, the altar where belief had always outranked fact. I imagined the china, the crystal, the smell of Mom's roast, the delicate theater of small talk. I imagined sliding a single page across the linen, a press release scheduled for 6 a.m., and watching faces reorganize themselves as facts rearranged the story. There was one thing left to do before the reveal: verify the rot. My forensic team connected dots nobody else wanted to see. Emails, transfers, trades that made sense only if you ignored the people they crushed. I learned that the empire wasn't failing by accident. It had been fed with other people's futures. The first time I read the proof, I stared at the wall and waited for the triumph I'd promised myself since I was a child. It didn't come. Just a colder resolve, a kind of grief with sharp edges. I printed the documents, slid them into a folder, and laid a watch beside it. The platinum piece I'd bought myself after my first $1 million quarter. Tomorrow I would wear Dad's brand and my own future. Tomorrow I would stop asking to be seen. Tomorrow I would be undeniable. I never planned to build an empire. I just needed a weapon that didn't look like one. Athena Investments started in my dorm room, running off a refurbished server and the fury of someone who'd spent her whole life being underestimated. Every keystroke felt like rebellion, an equation balancing itself after years of imbalance. The code I wrote wasn't elegant at first, but it was relentless. It learned faster than I could teach it. Patterns revealed themselves, market rhythms disguised as chaos, and I began to think of it as a mirror. If you feed the world's greed into a system, it shows you exactly where the cracks are. By senior year, the algorithm was pulling returns so clean they looked fictional. I tested it with tiny trades, quiet and surgical. The numbers didn't lie. I'd built something powerful enough to expose every illusion Wall Street worshipped. I remember sitting there one night, in that cold glow of my monitor, whispering, "They'll never see this coming," and meaning more than just the market. Grayson noticed me. He was one of those professors who mistook charisma for intellect, his lectures a performance for donors. He liked attention, but loved ambition. Mine fascinated him. "You think like a thief," he told me once after reviewing my project. "That's a compliment." I smiled politely, thinking he'd said more truth than he realized. The internship turned into shadow mentorship. He introduced me to Roland Vance, the managing director at Stratton Capital. Roland was everything Dad admired: expensive watch, easy arrogance, the air of someone who believed morality was just inefficient math. He asked about my thesis. I gave him the sanitized version. He smiled, offered me a job before graduation. "We could use a mind like yours," he said. I pretended to consider it. What I really wanted was access: his databases, his emails, his ghosts. When I founded Athena Investments, I did it through layers of silence. The paperwork traced back to no one. The funding appeared anonymous. And the first round of trades ran through accounts so tangled, even the IRS would get dizzy trying to follow them. My roommates thought I was freelancing. My parents thought I was networking. Only I knew the truth. I was preparing for war. The first major win came on a rainy Thursday. I shorted a mid-tier energy stock that tanked 40% overnight. The returns paid off my student loans, funded a small staff of 2 grad students, and left enough to reinvest. I remember walking across campus in the drizzle, no umbrella, grinning like a lunatic. Nobody around me had any idea I'd just shifted 6 figures before breakfast. Power that invisible feels intoxicating. I kept the illusion alive, posted brunch photos, flirted at networking events, let people underestimate me. Meanwhile, Athena multiplied. Each month it grew quieter and sharper, feeding off inefficiency, thriving in chaos. By the end of the year, our profits eclipsed some hedge funds that spent decades building reputations. Bloomberg called us a phantom on the exchange. I saved the article. The name Athena wasn't just poetic. It was insurance. If anyone ever traced it, they'd find wisdom and warfare. Both belonged to women who played by their own rules. Then the phone rang one evening. Dad's voice, controlled but frayed. "You keeping up with the markets, Lucy?" he asked. He only called me that when he wanted to remind me I was still a child in his eyes. "Always," I said. "Some vulture funds circling Brennan Industries. They're buying shares, quietly, strategically. Parasitic bastards." "That's terrible," I said, scrolling through the day's trades. "Maybe Ethan can help." "Ethan's a scientist, not a businessman," he snapped. "Whoever's behind this knows what they're doing." "I'm sure they do," I murmured, watching my portfolio update. Another fractional % of ownership sliding into place. After he hung up, I laughed. Not from joy, but from the sheer irony of it. All my life, he'd said knowledge meant power. He just never imagined I'd learn a different kind. The acquisition accelerated. By winter, Athena held 41%. I waited. Timing mattered. You don't strike when they're watching. You strike when they've convinced themselves they're safe. But the deeper I went, the darker it got. My forensic team uncovered transfers between Brennan Industries and Stratton Capital. Routine consulting fees, the documents claimed. Except they weren't routine. They were payoffs, hidden losses, false reports, pension funds gutted from the inside. My father and Roland had been partners in crime long before they were enemies in business. The discovery hit me like a chemical burn. The empire I'd grown up worshiping wasn't built. It was stolen. Every scholarship Ethan received, every family vacation, every Sunday dinner served on china bought with money taken from people who'd trusted them. Retirees, teachers, nurses, people whose faces they'd never see. I wanted to confront him right then, but rage is useless without structure, so I built structure. I started recording everything. Bank trails, internal memos, private correspondence. I didn't even need to hack much. Incompetence did half the work for me. Every file I opened was another nail in his coffin. Still, there were nights when anger dissolved into something quieter. Grief, maybe. I'd stare at old photos. Dad at the company picnic, Mom laughing beside him, Ethan holding a trophy while I held his jacket. I wondered if they'd ever been real, or just good at pretending. Athena's second-year profits crossed 8 figures. I expanded offices, hired a small team who thought Athena was a group of anonymous investors. Even they didn't know it was just me behind the curtain. Roland sent another email. "We should talk," he wrote. "There are opportunities if you're willing to play dirty." I stared at the screen for a long time before replying, "Define dirty." He invited me to dinner in Manhattan, the kind of restaurant where the lighting forgives everything. Over steak and wine, he bragged about shorting markets, moving billions with insider tips. "Your father used to have that spark," he said, cutting into his filet. until the guilt caught up with him. You don't seem burdened by that. Maybe I'm just better at hiding it, I said. He laughed, not realizing how close he'd come to the truth. Afterward, I walked back to my hotel through rain so thick it blurred the city lights. Somewhere between Madison and 47th, I decided I wasn't hiding anymore. The pretty one was gone. What replaced her was something colder, clearer. At dawn, I wired $3.2 million through Athena's shells to acquire the final controlling shares of Brennan Industries. The transaction cleared within an hour. On paper, I was anonymous. In reality, I owned my father's kingdom. The next morning, he called again, panic in his voice this time. Someone's buying us out. 20 years of building this company, and some vulture fund is circling. That's terrible, I said evenly. Maybe Ethan can help. He hesitated, then hung up without another word. I stared out the window, city skyline bleeding into sunrise, and whispered to my reflection, this is what being seen looks like. Still, in the quiet moments, a question kept needling me. What happens after the victory? What's left when the war ends? The answer would come soon enough, at a dinner table dressed for family but set for reckoning. Sunday dinner. That phrase used to mean routine, linen napkins, too much wine, and the polite theater of family civility. But that night, it meant the end. The house looked the same as ever when I pulled into the driveway. White columns, trimmed hedges, the porch light glowing like an invitation that wasn't. I'd chosen my armor carefully, a charcoal gray suit, hair pulled back, no jewelry, but the platinum watch I'd bought myself after my first $1 million quarter. It matched the brand of my father's, though mine kept better time. I rang the doorbell instead of using my key. A small, deliberate act, but it drew the first crack across Mom's perfect composure. Sweetheart, she said, her tone too bright, too rehearsed. You look so professional. The word you're searching for is successful, I said lightly, stepping inside. The smell of roast beef filled the air, the one dish Mom still made herself when she wanted to pretend we were normal. Ethan's car was already in the driveway, the shiny Tesla he couldn't afford but bought anyway for the optics. His girlfriend Cassandra followed him into the foyer, elegant in the way old money breeds rather than buys. I liked her immediately, though I knew she'd regret meeting us. Lucinda, she said, extending her hand, I've heard so much about you. I doubt any of it was accurate, I replied, shaking it. Dad emerged from his study with a glass of whiskey in hand, the amber liquid catching the chandelier light. Well, look who decided to join us, our little social butterfly, gracing the hive. Wouldn't miss it, I said, family unity and all. We gathered around the table, Mom's china gleaming, the centerpiece too extravagant for 4 people. I sat opposite Dad, the same place I'd sat for 20 years, the vantage point from which I'd learned to watch without speaking. Ethan launched into a story about his research grant, using words like quantum potential wells and applied photonics, while Dad nodded with performative pride. Mom beamed. Cassandra smiled in polite confusion. Then, predictably, Mom turned to me. And how's your little marketing job going? She asked in that sing-song tone she used for charity gossip. It's going well, I said, cutting into my food. Actually, I have some news. 4 faces turned toward me. Dad skeptical, Mom indulgent, Ethan faintly annoyed. Cassandra looked curious. I'm switching companies, I said, taking on a new role with significantly more responsibility. That's wonderful, dear, Mom said, as if congratulating a child on a coloring contest. Director of marketing? CEO, I said. The word hung there, strange and heavy. Dad chuckled, certain he'd misheard. You can't just call yourself that, Lucinda. Titles have to be earned. I agree, I said. That's why I bought them. Ethan's fork clinked against his plate. Bought what? I slid my phone across the table, the press release glowing on the screen. Athena Investments completes acquisition of Brennan Industries. Dad went still. That's impossible, he whispered. Athena's been buying us out for months. Yes, I said. I know. They've done quite well, actually. Lucinda, Mom said slowly, her voice trembling. What are you saying? I'm saying, I said, leaning back, that tomorrow morning I'll walk into Brennan Industries as its majority shareholder and acting CEO. Dad stood so fast his chair screeched against the hardwood. You're lying. I raised an eyebrow. Would you like to see the filings? He snatched the phone, scrolling frantically. The color drained from his face. Ethan looked between us, like someone realizing the house was on fire but too afraid to move. Cassandra's eyes widened. Pity, not shock. "You don't understand," Dad said, voice shaking. "You can't just take my company." "Your company?" I asked. "That's funny, because according to these documents, it's my company now." Ethan slammed his hand on the table. "Why would you do this?" "Because," I said softly, "it was built on stolen lives." Silence. Then quietly I opened my briefcase and laid the folder beside the gravy boat. March 2007, wire transfer from Stratton Capital to your personal account. $50,000. June 2008, another transfer, $200,000. December 2008, 4.6 million made shorting the housing market using insider information from your friend Roland Vance. Mom's hand flew to her mouth. "What are you talking about?" Dad's voice rose. "This is absurd. You don't know what you're saying." "Oh, I do," I said, spreading the papers like a dealer at a poker table. "You defrauded retirees, teachers, veterans, sold them worthless securities while padding your bonuses, and when the crash came, you profited off the ruin you helped create." "Lucinda," Ethan barked, "stop." "Why? Because it's inconvenient?" I turned to him. "You're a physicist. You understand cause and effect. Actions have consequences." Dad leaned forward, fury twisting his face. "You're destroying this family." "No," I said. "I'm exposing it." Mom's tears came then, messy and real. "How could you do this to your own father?" "How could he do this to everyone else?" I countered. "How many families did he bankrupt for that house, that car, those clubs you love so much?" She shook her head, sobbing. "You've gone too far." "Too far?" I said quietly. "That's the thing about distance, Mom. You never noticed how far away you already were." Cassandra stood, pale. "Ethan, you knew about this?" He looked stunned. "Of course not." "She's lying," Dad snarled. "This is some elaborate scheme to—" "Enough," I said. My voice came out cold, final. "Tomorrow, the SC will receive copies of every document in that folder. So will the FBI. The press release goes live at 6 a.m. You'll get official notice of termination at 9. You have 30 days to clear your office." He lunged across the table, eyes wild, whiskey glass toppling. Ethan grabbed him, shouting. Mom screamed. Cassandra stumbled back, knocking over a chair. Amid the chaos, I gathered the folder, tucking it neatly into my briefcase. When I reached the doorway, Mom grabbed my wrist. "Please," she sobbed. "Think about what you're doing. The family name." "I've thought about it," I said, gently removing her hand. "For 20 years, and I decided the family name deserves to burn." I walked out without looking back. In the car, I opened my laptop, attached the files to an encrypted email, and hovered over send. The cursor blinked like a heartbeat. Once I clicked, there'd be no undoing it. Dad would face prison. Ethan would lose everything. Mom would drown in shame. I clicked. The screen flashed. Email sent successfully. Outside, the house stood still under the porch light, perfect as a photograph. I sat there until the cold crept through the window glass, waiting to feel triumph, waiting for something. It never came. Only a strange, hollow quiet, the kind that follows after you've finally stopped asking to be loved. By dawn, the house of Brennan was already on fire, figuratively, though part of me wished it were literal. The press release went live at exactly 6 a.m. as scheduled. Athena Investments completes hostile takeover of Brennan Industries. By 6:15, my phone had 27 missed calls. By 7 o'clock, news anchors were saying my name. By 8 o'clock, reporters were outside my apartment building, shouting questions about betrayal, ambition, and bloodlines. At 9 o'clock, I walked into the headquarters of Brennan Industries wearing navy instead of gray, power softened by precision. The lobby guards had my credentials on file. The same men who once offered me polite smiles as Mr. Brennan's daughter now straightened their spines as if meeting a head of state. The glass elevator carried me upward through the city's reflection, past decades of history built on deception. The boardroom smelled of stale coffee and fear. 12 men in tailored suits waited, each one a fossil of my father's legacy. I took the seat at the head of the table. the same one he'd claimed for 20 years, and set down my briefcase. Gentlemen, I said, let's begin. For 3 hours, I outlined the new order: transparent accounting, forensic audits, immediate resignations for anyone complicit in misreporting. 6 executives were dismissed before lunch. 3 younger analysts promoted on the spot, bewildered but grateful. One of them whispered, "Thank you," as if I'd rescued him from something. Maybe I had. By noon, Brennan Industries was no longer his empire, it was mine. Outside, the story spread like wildfire. The daughter who devoured her father, pretty face, deadly mind. Athena unmasked. They never could write about a woman without turning her into a myth or a monster. I ignored it. I had work to do. At 3:00 p.m., I got the text from Mr. Jameson, my attorney. FBI executing warrants at your father's residence. SEC present. By 3:02, the footage hit social media. Dad in handcuffs, face pale, suit rumpled. Mom shouting at agents, her perfect hair undone for the first time in memory. Reporters swarmed. The image went viral before the van even pulled away. I watched the clip twice in silence, once for confirmation, once for closure. Then I closed my laptop and sat in the dark, listening to my heartbeat echo off the walls. I thought I'd feel vindicated. Instead, I felt empty. The next day, Cassandra called. "He's devastated," she said softly. "Your brother. He says you've ruined his life." "He built his life on illusions," I said. "I just turned on the lights." There was a pause. "You were right, you know. About your father. About everything. But I still don't know if I envy you or pity you." "Neither," I said. "You just see me clearly. That's rare." She hung up without saying goodbye. The trial moved fast. My evidence was airtight. Wire transfers, emails, audio logs, transaction histories. The prosecutor called it the most comprehensive documentation she'd ever seen. Roland Vance tried to run. The feds caught him in Connecticut 48 hours later. His mugshot appeared next to Dad's on every financial news site. 2 titans fall. Meanwhile, Brennan Industries transformed under my watch. I renamed it Athena Holdings, a cleansing, a rebirth. We liquidated toxic assets, refunded stolen pension accounts, set up a victims' restitution fund. Each dollar felt like a confession written in ledger form. But redemption doesn't buy peace. By winter, the threats started. Anonymous calls, emails, dripping with venom. "You destroyed your family. You should have stayed silent." One morning, I found Family Destroyer spray-painted in red across the entrance to my building. The letters looked like open wounds. I didn't flinch. I ordered security cameras installed, increased my guards, and went back to work. Ethan sent one text. "I hope you're happy." I didn't reply. Mom left 17 voicemails over 2 weeks. I listened to the last one once. "Please," she sobbed. "They're seizing the house. Your father might go to prison for 20 years. Ethan won't talk to me. Everything's gone. Please, Lucinda, help me." Her voice cracked on my name, and for a moment I saw her. Not the woman who measured my worth in appearances, but the mother who once read me fairy tales before bed. I deleted the message, but couldn't delete the ache it left behind. That night, I called my assistant at 2 a.m. "Buy the Brennan house," I said. "Excuse me?" "Put it under a trust. Let her live there. She can't know it's me." Understood. I hung up and stared at the ceiling until sunrise. Justice, I was learning, rarely feels like victory. The trial began in April. I attended every day, sitting quietly in the back row while the prosecutors dismantled my father's empire piece by piece. Roland took a plea deal, 15 years instead of 30. He turned state's witness, testifying that Dad had orchestrated half the frauds. His voice was steady, professional, almost bored. When Dad took the stand, he looked smaller than I remembered. His hair was gray at the edges, his posture stooped. For a brief, flickering second, I saw not the tyrant who dismissed me, but a man who'd built his life out of fear of failure. Then he opened his mouth. "I did what I had to do," he said, voice trembling. "Everything I did was for my family." "For your family?" the prosecutor repeated. "By stealing from other families?" "They were investments that went bad." "Mr. Brennan," she said coldly, You knowingly sold worthless securities to retirees, teachers, veterans. You made millions while they lost their homes. You knew exactly what you were doing. His silence was the loudest sound I'd ever heard. The verdict came back guilty on all counts. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Flashes popped like gunfire. "Lucinda, do you have a statement? How does it feel to destroy your father's company? Are you proud of what you've done?" I stopped on the steps, looked into the sea of cameras, and said, "I didn't destroy anything. I exposed what was already broken." Then I walked away. That night, alone in my penthouse, I opened the balcony doors. The city stretched beneath me, glass, smoke, and 1,000 quiet sins glittering in the dark. I poured a glass of wine, touched the railing, and whispered into the wind. He said it was for family. So was this. For the first time since childhood, no one interrupted me. But silence, I learned, is its own punishment. The story wasn't over when the gavel fell. Not for me, not for any of us. Dad's conviction made headlines for a week, maybe 2. The world loves a spectacle, but tires quickly of aftermath. Once the cameras left, what remained was quieter and crueler. I had won, technically. Brennan Industries was gone, replaced by Athena Holdings, clean and transparent, audited and reborn. But winning feels meaningless when you're the only one left standing in the ruins. Ethan lost his university job within a month. The department claimed budget restructuring, but we both knew better. Nobody wants the brother of a convicted fraudster giving lectures on ethics and science. Cassandra left him soon after. Not because of me, though I'm sure I made a convenient excuse, but because guilt turns men cruel. I found out later she'd moved back to Baltimore to work at a clinic. Mom stayed in the house, the one I'd secretly bought back under a trust. The local news filmed her once, walking through the garden in a sweater, reporters shouting questions from behind the fence. "Do you blame your daughter?" one called. She didn't answer. She just kept trimming the roses, the same ones she'd planted when Ethan got his MIT acceptance letter. Some nights I replayed that clip until the silence became unbearable. Then I'd turn it off and go back to work, because work was the only place where silence felt earned. The restitution fund became my obsession. I wanted numbers to mean something again. We paid back what we could: pensions, retirement accounts, savings plans that had vanished into consulting losses. I wrote the checks personally, refusing to let any intern handle it. Each signature felt like a small exorcism. But then came the letters. Some people wrote to thank me. Others called me a monster. One widow sent me a photo of her husband. He'd taken his life in 2009 after losing everything to Stratton Capital. "You were his daughter's age," she wrote. "He said there were no good people left in finance. Maybe you've proven him wrong. I wish you'd done it sooner." I kept that letter in my desk drawer. Sometimes I read it to remind myself that justice has terrible timing. At night, I dreamed of my father sitting across the dinner table again, laughing about calculated risk. Only now, his chair was empty, and I was the one trying to fill the silence with something that sounded like reason. 6 months after the verdict, Cassandra showed up at my office unannounced. I'd been expecting hate. Instead, she looked calm. "I'm not here to fight," she said. "I'm here to ask for help." She slid a folder across my desk. Inside were blueprints, proposals, financial models, all stamped with the same name, the Athena Clinic. "A medical and counseling center for people ruined by financial crimes," she explained. "They lose their money, then their health, then their hope. No one helps them rebuild." "You want funding," I said. "I want to make something good from all the wreckage you exposed." She met my eyes. "I thought maybe you did too." Her voice had no accusation in it, just exhaustion. I admired that. "How much do you need?" I asked. Her eyes widened. "You haven't even read the numbers." "I don't need to. You've already done your homework." We worked out the details that night. A 3-year endowment, full operational control under her leadership, with Athena Holdings listed as an anonymous benefactor. When she left, she hesitated at the door. "You know," she said softly, "you don't have to spend the rest of your life fixing his mess." "I'm not fixing his mess," I replied. "I'm cleaning mine." After she left, I stood by the window watching the city lights flicker below. For the first time since the takeover, I felt something that wasn't anger or guilt. It wasn't quite peace, but it was closer than I'd been. Dr. Ramirez called that progress. I'd started therapy after the trial, on Cassandra's suggestion, ironically. My therapist was blunt, the kind of woman who could dissect denial with surgical precision. You built your life around proving something, she said in our first session. Now you've proven it. So what's left? I don't know, I admitted. Maybe redemption. For who? She asked. Them or you? I didn't answer. She told me healing would require forgiveness, not for their sake, but for mine. I laughed. I don't forgive people who burn down houses, I said. No, she replied, but you keep standing in the ashes, breathing smoke, waiting for them to rebuild it. I didn't laugh after that. I began painting again. At first, just abstract messes, violent reds, cold blacks, too much texture, and not enough form. It was ugly and raw, but it was mine. Each canvas was a version of the dinner table, the courtroom, the silent phone calls. A therapist once said, "Sometimes you have to paint the fire before you can leave it." So I did. Then the letter came, from prison. My father's handwriting, shaky but unmistakable. I left it on the table for 3 days before opening it. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't even try to justify himself. He just wrote that he'd built his empire out of fear. Fear of being small, of being forgotten, of being ordinary. I told myself I was providing for you, he wrote, but the truth is, I was trying to prove I mattered. I see now that I never did, not the way I thought. At the end, he wrote one line that gutted me. You were the only one who saw through me, and I hated you for it. I should have thanked you instead. I folded the letter carefully, placed it in the same drawer as the widow's photograph. 2 confessions, one for every side of the story. The next morning, I drove to the coast. No destination, just movement. I parked by the water, rolled down the window, and let the cold wind slap the breath back into me. Justice had taken everything I loved, but maybe, just maybe, it had given me a chance to build something worth loving in return. When I came back, the first check to the Athena Clinic cleared. Some debts, I realized, don't belong in ledgers. They belong in what you choose to build next. Time has a strange way of softening headlines. By the second year after the trial, people stopped using the phrase, the daughter who destroyed her father. Now they called me the woman who rebuilt an empire. Same story, different tone. Success, I learned, is just scandal with better lighting. The Athena Clinic thrived under Cassandra's leadership. The first quarterly report arrived bound in a simple blue folder. 3,000 patients treated, 600 families counseled, 0 bankruptcies from untreated medical debt. The numbers shouldn't have made me cry, but they did. Because for once, numbers meant healing, not theft. I visited the clinic unannounced one afternoon. The building smelled of disinfectant and hope, that rare, trembling kind you can actually feel in the air. In the waiting room, an older man held his wife's hand while a young volunteer explained their financial assistance plan. "No, sir," she said gently. "You don't owe us anything." He blinked, confused, then whispered, "No one's ever said that to me before." I left before anyone recognized me. I didn't need to be thanked. Watching was enough. That night, I dreamed of my father for the first time since his sentencing. He was sitting at the dinner table again, this time silent, empty glass in hand. He didn't look angry, just tired. I sat across from him and finally asked, "Why wasn't I ever enough?" He looked up, eyes hollow. "Because if you were," he said, "then I'd have to face what I wasn't." I woke up gasping. The sheets were damp with sweat, but the air felt lighter somehow. Maybe that's what closure really is, not forgiveness, but understanding why you'll never get it. Dr. Ramirez called that progress too. "Do you still think about revenge?" she asked one session. "No," I said. "Revenge is a young woman's hobby. I've graduated." "What do you think about now?" "Balance," I said. "Justice feels cleaner when it comes with compassion." She smiled. "Good. That means you're finally becoming human again." Mom found out about the house that year. Her neighbor had mentioned the trust's owner during a charity luncheon. She called me the same evening, her voice shaking. "The house," she said. "That was you?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because you're still my mother." There was a long pause, then the sound of her crying. Not the brittle kind I remembered from childhood, but raw, remorseful. "I'm sorry," she said, "for all of it. For every time we made you feel small, for pretending I didn't know. I know." "Does that change anything?" "No," I said quietly. "But it's a start." It wasn't a reconciliation exactly, more like a ceasefire. She sent birthday cards now, and I called her on holidays. We spoke like neighbors who remembered once sharing a fence. It was enough. Ethan, on the other hand, vanished. Rumor said he'd taken a teaching job somewhere in Oregon. No address, no contact. I told myself I didn't care. That was half true. By the third year, Athena Holdings had stabilized. The restitution fund had returned $120 million to victims. The clinic expanded to a second city, and the media finally grew bored of my face. I preferred it that way. Fame is another kind of surveillance. Still, the quiet didn't last. One day, a courier dropped a letter at my office, prison stationery again. My father's handwriting shakier than before. I almost threw it away, but curiosity has its own gravity. I think about you every day, he wrote, about what you built from what I broke. You've become everything I pretended to be. I envy you, but I'm proud too. Tell your mother I'm sorry. She won't believe me, but say it anyway. He didn't sign it with love, just his name. That, somehow, was worse. I folded the letter into thirds and placed it beside the first one. The ink from both had begun to fade, but the weight remained. Later that week, I visited the coast again. The same spot I'd gone after the trial, the one where the horizon looked wide enough to swallow guilt. The sea was calmer this time. I sat on the hood of my car, hair whipping in the wind, and said aloud, I see you now. Not to him, but to the version of myself who'd once needed his approval like oxygen. When I got home, I found a painting waiting on the easel, one I'd finished weeks earlier without naming. Reds bleeding into gray, streaks of white cutting through like lightning. I took a brush and wrote a single word in the corner, rebirth. Months blurred into seasons. Cassandra's clinic opened its third location. Mom started forgetting things, names, dates, sometimes who I was on the phone. Ethan called for the first time in 5 years. His voice was rougher, slower. She needs care, he said. Full time. I'll handle it, I said. I arranged the best memory care facility in the state. Private room, full staff, no expense spared. Another anonymous donation. Ethan figured it out anyway. Thank you, he said in a voicemail. We'll never be okay, but thank you for this. I went to see her once. She didn't recognize me. She smiled and said, You remind me of my daughter. She was very beautiful. I asked what happened to her daughter. Oh, she went away, Mom said. Busy with her life, I suppose. I held her hand until she fell asleep, then sat there for a while listening to her breath. Dr. Ramirez asked later if it hurt. Yes, I said, but not the way it used to. It's a different kind of pain now. Softer, like it's remembering me instead of the other way around. She nodded. That's healing. Years folded into each other after that. The Athena Fund expanded internationally. Cassandra's clinic received national recognition, and my name slowly drifted out of headlines. People forgot the scandal. They only remembered the structure I left behind. Sometimes, on quiet nights, I'd scroll through our beneficiaries' letters. Single mothers who'd opened businesses, widows who'd found stability, students whose scholarships bore my mother's maiden name. Each one reminded me of something Dr. Ramirez once said. Redemption isn't an ending, it's maintenance. And so I maintained, not out of guilt anymore, but out of choice. The world had finally stopped seeing me as the pretty one, the vengeful one, the ruthless one. Now I was just Lucinda Brennan, a woman who'd broken her family to rebuild something better. And for the first time, that was enough. 5 years after the trial, I met Mira. It was at a conference I hadn't even wanted to attend. Some corporate ethics summit full of people who thought the word transparency could be trademarked. I was scheduled to give a keynote about rebuilding trust in the financial sector, a topic I'd written but didn't believe in anymore. Mira was there representing a nonprofit that provided microloans to women starting businesses in developing countries. When we spoke during a coffee break, she didn't ask about my companies or my father. She asked about the painting I'd mentioned in passing during my speech. You said color helps you remember what's real, she said, her voice warm, curious. What color are you today? Gray, I told her honestly, the kind that comes after fire. She smiled. Then maybe it's time for blue. That conversation lasted 4 hours. She had this rare ability to make silence comfortable, to look at you without expecting confession, just listening. It had been so long since anyone did that without agenda. We started seeing each other quietly. Dinners, long walks, mornings spent arguing about philosophy and faith and forgiveness. She challenged me in ways no one else ever had. Once, when I deflected a question about my father, she said, "You talk about justice like it's a math problem. But people aren't equations, Lucinda. We don't balance. We bleed." I didn't answer then, but later, I started painting in blues again. While love was slowly stitching something inside me back together, life continued its cruel symmetry. Mom's memory declined faster than any of us expected. Ethan called again, his voice brittle with exhaustion. "She's forgetting days at a time now," he said. "She doesn't remember Dad's in prison. She asked for him at dinner." "I'll take care of it," I said. I arranged for her transfer to a facility near the coast, one with a garden, the kind she used to brag about. I visited once. She didn't know me. She took my hand and said, "Such a lovely girl. You remind me of my daughter. She was very bright, always too serious." I smiled and said, "She's doing all right." That night, I drove home with the windows down and the ocean air clawing at my throat. Dr. Ramirez asked if I regretted helping her. "No," I said. "It's not forgiveness. It's inheritance. I inherited her blindness. I just chose to see with it instead." 2 years later, Mom passed quietly in her sleep. The facility called at dawn. Ethan and I hadn't spoken in nearly a decade, but I called him anyway. He answered on the first ring. "I know," he said before I could speak. His voice cracked on the next word. "Thank you for taking care of her." We met again at the funeral. Gray skies, small service, no reporters. Ethan gave the eulogy. "She was a product of her generation," he said, his voice steady. "Taught to measure worth by reflection, her husband's, her children's. She made mistakes, but she also did her best with the tools she had." I wasn't sure I agreed, but I understood why he needed to say it. Afterward, as guests trickled away, Ethan lingered by the gravesite. "I wanted to hate you forever," he said quietly, "but I can't anymore." "Good," I said. "It's exhausting." He almost smiled. "She didn't remember much near the end, but she remembered you as beautiful. Not smart, not successful, just beautiful. I think that was her way of apologizing." "Maybe," I said, "or maybe she just saw me clearly for the first time." We stood in silence for a while, the kind that finally felt like peace instead of punishment. Over the following months, we began to rebuild something, fragile but real. Occasional texts, yearly phone calls. He sent pictures of his lectures, his students, the small house he'd bought in Oregon. He'd remarried, a woman named Rebecca, who taught high school physics. "She's kind," he wrote. "You'd like her." He was right. When we met years later, Rebecca hugged me before I could even introduce myself. "He talks about you all the time," she said. "He says you're the bravest person he's ever known." I was angry, I said, not brave. "Same thing sometimes," she replied. By then, Mira and I had been living together for almost 3 years. She was everything the old me would have dismissed. Earnest, idealistic, patient. She taught me to stop defining myself by what I'd survived. "You're allowed to be happy, Lucinda," she said once while tracing the lines of my palm. "You've spent your life proving your worth. You can rest now." Rest. The word felt foreign, but slowly I learned how. We bought a small house upstate, white walls, big windows, and a studio with the kind of light that forgives imperfection. I painted every morning, answered emails by afternoon, and cooked dinner with her every night. Some days, we didn't talk at all, and that silence felt holy. I was 40 when I officially stepped down as CEO. The business press called it a shocking exit. Investors begged me to reconsider, but I'd already made up my mind. I didn't want to lead anymore. I wanted to live. I promoted 2 women I'd mentored to take my place, both brilliant, both underestimated. Watching them take over felt better than any headline ever had. Ethan and I spoke the day the news broke. "So it's really over," he said. "No," I said. "It's just begun." In that moment, I realized the story that started as vengeance had become something else entirely. It was never about destroying him or redeeming myself. It was about the right to define what my life meant. I wasn't the pretty one anymore, or the ruthless one, or the savior. I was just someone who'd learned how to turn pain into purpose and still found room for love. One night, Mira asked if I still thought about my father. "Sometimes," I said, "but mostly, I think about the girl I was before him. The one who believed she had to earn her place in the world." "And now?" "Now," I said, smiling into her shoulder, "I just take up space." The next morning, I painted a new canvas, soft blues melting into gold, no edges, no fire. I titled it Grace. It was the first thing I'd ever painted that didn't need an explanation. Years slipped by quietly, the way healing does when you stop demanding proof of it. Mira and I built a life stitched together from calm mornings and long, unhurried days. I still owned shares in Athena Holdings, still advised when necessary, but I no longer checked the markets before breakfast. My world had become smaller, simpler, measured not in profit margins, but in hours of sunlight across a studio floor. Cassandra's clinic had grown beyond anything we imagined. 5 locations now, thousands of patients treated every month. She sent photos sometimes, smiling families, staff gatherings, volunteers wearing shirts that read "Hope is accounted for." I never asked to have my name on a wall, but she hung one painting anyway, the small one I'd titled Rebirth. "Because that's what you gave me," she wrote. Ethan called more often after Mom's death. At first, the conversations were practical: taxes, estate issues, the logistics of closure. Then they turned personal. He'd remarried, had 2 children. He named his daughter Lena after our grandmother. "She has your eyes, Fa," he said once, showing me a photo. I almost believed him. When Lena was 7, he brought her to visit. She ran through my garden, stopping to examine the sunflowers, her hair a riot of gold against the green. "Aunt Lucy," she said, her small hands on her hips, "Dad says you're very smart." "Does he?" I asked, smiling. "Yes. He says you taught him not to be afraid of being wrong." I knelt beside her. "That's good advice," I said. "He learned it the hard way." She grinned. "He said so." After they left, Mira found me standing by the window, tears caught in the corners of my smile. "You're thinking about the past again," she said softly. "Just realizing," I murmured, "that sometimes redemption comes wearing tiny sneakers." When my father died in prison, I was 62. The letter arrived from Ethan, 2 lines. "Dad's gone. Small service. I'll handle it." I sent flowers. No card. I thought that was enough. A week later, a package arrived from the prison warden. Inside was my father's watch, the same brand as mine, older, worn. Beneath it, a single envelope addressed in trembling handwriting. "For Lucinda." I waited a week before opening it. "You were right, about everything. I built my success on other people's suffering. I dismissed you because I was afraid of what your intelligence revealed about my own mediocrity. You were the mirror I couldn't stand to look at. You didn't destroy the family. I did. You only exposed what I buried. I don't deserve forgiveness, but I hope you found peace." He signed it simply, Dad. I didn't cry right away. I set the letter on my desk, beside the old ones from before, the widow's note, the first confession, the apology that came too late. 3 artifacts of the same disease: greed, pride, blindness. Then I went to my studio, pulled a blank canvas from the rack, and began to paint. This time I didn't use red. I didn't even outline. I just let the colors move the way memory does. Gray fading into lavender, lavender into gold. I titled it Enough, because I finally was. When the painting dried, I donated it to Cassandra's clinic for their 20th anniversary gala. She called afterward, laughing through tears. "People stopped in front of it for an hour," she said. "They said it made them feel like letting go." "That's what it's for," I said. By then, my body had begun to slow. Arthritis in my hands made painting harder, but I kept doing it anyway. Each stroke a small act of defiance, a reminder that creation always outlives destruction. One autumn afternoon, I was invited to speak at a university, a lecture series on ethics in finance, the same kind of event that once bored me to death. I agreed, but only on one condition, that I could tell the truth, not the legend. The auditorium was packed with students, eager, self-assured, still unscarred by compromise. I looked out at them and said, "Some people think I'm a hero. Others think I'm a villain. Both are wrong. I'm just a person who was harmed and who harmed others in return. I wanted justice. I found it. And then I had to live with it." They were quiet, maybe expecting a redemption arc, maybe waiting for a secret formula. "There's no clean victory," I said. "There's just what you can live with afterward. Justice stops new wounds, but it doesn't heal the old ones. Only mercy does, especially the kind you give yourself." When the applause came, it felt gentle, respectful, not worshipful. I liked that. Later, a young woman approached me. early 20s, hair pulled tight, eyes full of storm. My boss told me women like me are too emotional for finance, she said. He said I should find a husband instead of a career. What are you going to do? I asked. Prove him wrong, she said fiercely. I handed her my card. When you've done that, I told her, call me. I invest in people who've been underestimated. But don't make your career about proving him wrong. Make it about proving yourself right. She nodded, eyes shining. Thank you. After she left, I stood for a long time in the empty auditorium, thinking about cycles, how patterns repeat until someone chooses to end them. Maybe that was what I'd done. Not saved the world, not avenged it, just interrupted the loop long enough to breathe. Years later, Ethan's daughter, grown now, married, a teacher like her mother, brought her own child to visit. A boy, curious and bright-eyed. He climbed onto my lap and asked, "Are you famous?" "No," I said. "I'm seen." He looked puzzled. "What's the difference?" "When you're famous, people look at you," I said. "When you're seen, they understand you." He thought about that, then nodded solemnly, as if it made perfect sense. The years kept moving, slow but generous. The clinic expanded across states. The scholarship fund I'd created for women in finance produced its first generation of CEOs, auditors, and analysts, women who sent me letters that began, "Someone finally believed in me." When I turned 80, Mira organized a small retrospective of my paintings in a downtown gallery. The theme was Survivors of Silence. Each canvas told a version of the same story, loss transformed into light. At the center hung Enough. During the opening, a young artist approached me, eyes wide. "What does it mean?" she asked. "It means," I said, "you can stop fighting once you've built something beautiful from what broke you." The girl smiled. "Did you?" I looked around at the canvases, at Mira laughing with Ethan's family, at the photos of clinic patients projected on the walls, and said, "Yes, finally." That night, I went home, sat in my studio, and started one last painting. No figures, no shadows, just color. Soft blues fading into warm gold, like dawn. When I finished, I signed my name in small letters at the corner and whispered the words that had eluded me all my life. I did what I came to do. Outside, the horizon began to glow, light spilling gently over everything I'd built. And for the first time in all the years since that long ago dinner table, the world was quiet. Completely blessedly quiet.